The monolithic view of emerging markets as a single entity that you can invest in is obsolete. Emerging markets are diverging. They're no longer being lifted by a single common tide of developed market growth.
Emerging markets are really at a crossroads. Institutional investors should actually have a rethink and a relook at the way in which they invest in emerging markets. A top-down, country-by-country look doesn't work anymore.
The broad indices for emerging markets investing are a bit of a straitjacket for investors. You need to take a much more bottom-up view.
What we're urging is actually an investment philosophy that focuses on the major themes that cut across emerging markets.
While emerging markets will be the key driver of global growth over the next decade, the way investors need to access these opportunities is very different from what worked in the past. The first big trend we see is the rise of the domestic middle class. There's a $12 trillion spent by the emerging market middle class today. That's going to rise to over $30 trillion by 2030.
There's a lot of spending in things like consumer durables, cars, appliances.
There'll be 1.7 million workers added to the labor force every month. We see opportunities in financial services, in healthcare, in pharma, in travel. Last year alone, over 135 million Chinese traveled abroad. That's greater than the entire population of the UK and France combined.
One of the big paradigm shifts is many of the exports of the emerging markets are going to other emerging markets.
Trade between emerging markets has gone up from 25% in 1995 to over 40% today. One great example is Southeast Asia, where we see first Thai consumers move from cycles and motorbikes to cars, and then exporting motorbikes to Cambodia. Another key trend is leapfrogging into the digital era and move to opportunities in fintech and e-commerce and mobile payments and the logistics surrounding that. India is a great example where e-commerce is really taking off. E-commerce is about 16 billion currently in India, and we think it'll be over 45 billion by 2020.
These payment processes are going to enable consumers to move to an automatic payment system much faster than anything we've seen in the developed world.
You can go to a small rural market in China and pay 20 cents over your mobile phone to buy a vegetable. As economies modernize, a new wave of opportunities will arise in real estate, in infrastructure, in domestic debt markets.
Last year, 9 out of every 10 skyscrapers were actually built in the emerging markets.
There's a big dearth of infrastructure in low-income economies. That's about water lines and sewage and electricity. In higher-income economies, it's about being ready for a wireless world.
We've seen emerging markets certainly become more fiscally stable. We're also seeing a number of emerging economies actually begin to get re-rated by the major agencies. PGIM really does differentiate itself in our overall approach to emerging markets. We absolutely look at this from across a wide range of asset classes. We have about 1,100 investment professionals around the world, and so we're seeing the trends live in location.
Increasingly, investors will want to think locally in a highly active and highly dynamic way to capture the real opportunities that emerge.
Emerging markets are going to be a huge source of the global growth for the next decade.